Welcome to Transjacked, Victims of the Gender Industry Speak Out. Erin Brewer and Maria Keffler of Advocates Protecting Children talk to people whose lives have been upended by gender ideology activism, including parents, teachers, detransitioners, and others who were exploited by unethical doctors, therapists, schools, and activists. Listen to their stories as they describe the damage being wrought on individuals, families, and society by the gender industry. Welcome to Transjacked, Victims of the Gender Industry Speak Out. I'm Maria Keffler.
I'm Erin Brewer, and who do we have with us today?
Today we have Petra. She is a member of the Advocates Protecting Children Advisory Board. She is a young woman who was trans identified for several years in middle school and high school, and we're here to find out a little bit more about her story today.
Well, Petra, thank you so much for being with us. I feel like your experience is so different from mine as a trans-identified child, because when I was a little kid, nobody affirmed me. Nobody said, you're right, you are trans, whereas you had a very different experience. Can you just tell us about it?
Yeah, I obviously was trans in the era of, oh my gosh, this is biological. You have to affirm or else she'll, commit suicide and all this stuff. Whereas you actually got everyone around you knew that this is not natural. This is not just something that happens. I thankfully had people who did not just automatically affirm and went, wait a minute, around me. But if I hadn't, I probably would have just been swept into the wave of just medicalization and, hormones and transitioning and all that stuff.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Like, how did you come to think that you were trans identified or that you were transgender? How did it happen for you?
I think it was just a series of straws all piled up on a camel's back. I mean, for one thing, I'm autistic, and as with many autistic people, I do not very well get along in social situations. And so for most of sixth and early seventh grade, I was just kind of, with my friends, just kind of on my own in my own little corner. And as soon as I identified as transgender, then it was obviously the whole shabam where everyone loves you, everyone's constantly talking to you, you're the best. It was also, I had a lot of anger about how men are stronger than women, and I want to be strong. I've always wanted to be big and strong, but because I'm a woman, I naturally have a disadvantage to that. And so becoming transgender was sort of a way to escape that. Like, yes, I am a man. I am big and strong. I can take care of myself. And just a lot of different things sort of fed into that.
That's interesting that you say that, Petra, because as I'm thinking about if you had been in another situation where you had been given the option to get onto cross-sex hormones, you would have been given testosterone, and that feeling of being big and strong would have been reinforced. And so I'm guessing if that had happened, that initially you would have thought, this was exactly what I needed. This was the right treatment.
Yeah, if I had, which I'm extremely grateful I'm not, but if I had been put on testosterone, I probably would have thought, oh wow, I'm getting bigger and stronger. But not only is testosterone terrible for you, but I'm also very glad that not taking any kind of drugs, any kind of just shortcuts has allowed me to actually put in hard work to becoming strong, and in a way that I've recognized that I'm a woman doing it. I don't ever go to the gym and say, yes, I'm a man, because I know I'm a woman and I'm proud to be a woman now.
Well, and it's important for women to have strong role models. And so I'm proud that you're a woman and that you've recognized that. And it's based on what you were saying. It sounds like the sort of thoughts that you were a man or could be a man or wanted to be a man started between sixth and seventh grade. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm trying to remember exactly when I started to kind of make that shift, probably early seventh grade, if I had to guess. Maybe a little bit later than that. But it was very much I was situated on this table that was slowly beginning to turn. And as soon as I started moving, boom, I was on the way. I was moving. I was going that way. because everyone around you, as soon as you show even the slightest hint of, well, maybe 100% girly girl, then it's automatically, whoa, you must be transgender. And so it very, very quickly went from like, well, I don't really want to be a girl that much to like, boom, I'm transgender identified. I'm going through all this. I'm,
And is it correct in saying that your parents didn't affirm you, but the people at school did?
Yes. Looking back, I really thought, oh my gosh, my parents are terrible. They hate me. They're terrible to me. But they were not. I just didn't like being told that I was wrong, which nobody likes being told that they're wrong. But I especially didn't like being told that I was wrong by my supposedly quote unquote uncool parents, and with everyone else at school saying like, oh my gosh, your parents are abusive, they're terrible, they don't affirm you, you need to cut them off as soon as you turn 18.
That's
Was
so
that
sad.
just other kids at school? Did teachers and staff kind of play into that?
Teachers and staff weren't direct about it. They never said, oh my gosh, your parents are abusive. But I really got the vibe from them that they did not approve of my parents.
Can you
So
explain, like, I'm sorry, Erin, I was just like, how did you get that vibe? Like, can you give any examples or?
Well, they obviously used my preferred name and pronouns. And like having heard this from my mom, she has said that when I announced a transgender identity and she didn't immediately affirm, they just lost all respect for her. They treated her like a piece of crap after that, despite before then being very nice to her. And they also were just, I'm trying to think of how to word this. They just sort of saw themselves as like knights in shining armor. I was this poor trans kid in distress with abusive parents, and they kind of like, oh, here, there's this new trans book at the library, you want to read it, that kind of thing.
they were actively undermining your parents, it sounds like.
Yes, very much so.
So can you talk a little bit about what it looked like for you to transition at school?
I used to be, and I'm still not this way anymore, but when I was in 6th grade, I was very much a girly girl. I wore dresses, pink, makeup, all that kind of stuff. But I kind of started to shift away from that. I think just as a natural, when you're going through puberty, your style changes. But then when I started to do the whole trans thing, especially with all of the older, cool trans kids at school, there's this one girl who was just completely, she wore all black. She had like dyed hair and like all of like the different pins on her fake leather jacket and like chains and stuff. And that was just so cool to me that I just completely changed my clothing style. I changed everything. I think if I had not been exposed to transgenderism, I probably would have like become more kind of stereotypically masculine in my clothing just because that was how my style was changing. But I would not have become so, quite frankly, emo.
How did you interact with these older kids? Like, were you, because you're not in classes with older kids, right?
Yeah, I wasn't in any classes with them, obviously, because, I was in 7th grade and they were in like 11th and 12th grade. We went to the GSA club together, though, and we did occasionally pass by each other in the hallways. At the GSA club, looking back, that was the stupidest thing that could have possibly gone on in a school because you had 6th graders through 12th graders alone in this room with no adult. And we were all just talking about like sexuality. And looking back, that was just so incredibly, like, I am grateful that things did not go worse than they did because that could have gone very, very south very, very quickly.
So you had
And
middle school students and high school students together in this. Now GSA stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Is that right?
it
But
was either Gay Straight Alliance or Gender Sexuality Alliance. I
Yeah, I
think it
know
was.
when I was a kid, it was Gay Straight Alliance, and it's been changing as the
okay.
transgender ideology has gotten more entrenched.
Yeah.
It's become the Gender Sexuality Alliance. And to me, it just seems bizarre that you would have a bunch of junior high and high school kids getting together and talking about sexuality without adults there to sort of mediate and to, you know, make
Yeah.
sure that things don't get out of hand. I'm guessing that there were both male and females in the room.
Yes.
And so this potentially, as you know, a 7th grade girl, you know, if you can get high school students who could really undermine your ability to understand even consent and what's appropriate.
Yeah. One of the biggest things is looking back, you know, we talked a lot about like testosterone and estrogen, you know, depending on who was a boy, who was a girl, and that kind of thing. Like, oh, I can't wait till I'm 18 and I can start on T. We all talked about how glorious it's going to be when we started on that. No one ever, looking back, I don't even think anyone knew about all of the negative side effects and all of what would happen if you did that. You know, nobody once mentioned, oh yeah, taking testosterone can demineralize your bones to 3% the strength they're supposed to be. Nobody ever mentioned that because I don't think anyone knew that. And that was very, very dangerous, because if I hadn't like gone, wait a minute, and decided to desist, I could be at like I could be extremely weak and in ill health right now because of that.
I'm curious, there were other trans identified kids in the GSA club, I'm assuming. What did they talk about their parents? Did their parents affirm them, or what was that like?
I'm trying to remember. We never really got like too deep into the subject of parents. I think because most of them had parents who quote unquote affirmed them. I know one of the girls who identified as like non-binary or something like that, she had 2 lesbian parents who were just so into it, and so, oh my gosh, they are wonderful, that kind of thing. I think most of them had parents that were just absolutely into it. And I think I mentioned once or twice that my parents weren't into it. And of course, it was the whole, oh, I'm so sorry. It must be so hard. You know, the whole pity show.
So can you talk a little bit about how you ended up desisting?
So my parents pulled me from my school, understandably, although I was absolutely furious at the time, and decided to homeschool me. And they put me in an extremely conservative co-op where I did not agree with most of anything that they thought, and quite frankly, I still don't. But I was at risk of looking stupid, and that is the biggest thing. Is that, you know, I had never really thought about, well, what makes gender different than personality? How is gender fluid and innate at the same time? I'd never thought about it because they never needed to. And then I had all these peers all of a sudden who were like, well, how is gender innate and fluid at the same time? And my choices were to not think about it and to look stupid in front of my other teenage peers, which is the worst possible scenario when you're 13. Or I could think about it, and I did, and ended up realizing very, very begrudgingly, this makes no sense. And I slowly had to kind of eat my pride a little bit and kind of go, you know what, this is absolutely ridiculous.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because this is a little bit tangential, but I was just watching a video by Excellence, who's sort of someone who, you know, critiques some of these ideas in the movement. And she was talking about a video that recently came out called "What is a Woman" by Matt Walsh. And one of the scenes, he's interviewing a gender doctor, and she says that chickens have gender identity, but they don't have a gender. Oh, wait, it's very convoluted. But basically, she was saying that the chickens are assigned a gender by us, but they're not capable of having a gender identity because they're chickens. And the question is, okay, chickens don't have gender identity. So do cows? So do great apes? So, you know, at what point, you know, do animals start to become aware of their gender identity? Is this just like a gendered soul that's only born into humans, which raises the question. So this is very much a religious belief, if that's the case. And then she also brought up the idea that if it's based on cognitive ability, does that mean that, someone who is developmentally delayed doesn't have a gender identity? I mean, it's very complicated. And I think one of the things that I notice about the people in the movement is that they just throw things out. So this came in the context of, children are going to commit suicide and kill them, if they're not affirmed, but we don't have to worry about chickens doing that, which is just a ludicrous thing to say. But that's one of the ways in which they stop your thinking. So it sounds to me like you were in an environment where you weren't really allowed to question it. You were just sort of affirmed and pushed in one direction. And as soon as you got around another group of people, it allowed you the opportunity to think about these ideas a little bit more deeply.
Yes, it did. And another thing was that, this was an extremely conservative group, and I saw the same kind of thought stopping techniques going on with some of their things that was going on with some of the transgender things. Like I remember one of the kids, he's fascinated by black holes, and he was doing this presentation on black holes. And he is, a God created the earth in 6 days, a few thousand years ago kind of guy. And he said, there's a theory that supermassive black holes were created over billions and billions of years through the collision of other black holes. And he said, there's no evidence for or against this. It's just a theory, but it's very unlikely. And I just went, so because this contradicts your worldview, you say that it's unlikely despite the fact that there's no evidence for or against it. And I realized, wait a minute, that's exactly what some of these other people are saying. Like, hold on a minute.
It's really interesting how worldview can change. A lot of times people with a worldview don't even realize they have it. And it seems to me like that's what's happening. Well, you mentioned in the group, in the school that you went to, but also in the previous school, they would just happen to be different worldviews. What would you recommend to parents who have a child who's adopted a trans identity, who has bought into that worldview? Is there anything that your parents could have said or done other than put you in this other group that sort of raised your awareness to help you sort of see that you had adopted a very narrow worldview?
I mean, the number 3 things, like the top 3, are get rid of social media. Social media is an absolute nightmare. Get rid, like if you can, pull from public school. It's not all people can do that, but that's also just something very important. And keep the relationship with the child as intact as possible, because like my parents, they would, take us to our grandparents' house. We would go fishing. We would, I would do wood carving with my grandpa, that kind of thing, stuff that didn't like even remotely involve transgender ideology, but that kind of built up the relationship between us enough so that I wasn't able to just emotionally cut them off because, well, but I was just doing this fun thing with my dad, but I was just doing this fun thing with my mom.
That's that's a really important insight, because you've got a whole group of people telling you that your parents are abusive because they're not affirming you. And then you're going home in a clearly not abusive but loving environment. I can imagine though, if a child was in an environment that had some stresses in it, that was more difficult, that it would be so easy just to completely assume that the parents were the bad guys. It's got to be so hard for parents.
Yeah, I mean, my parents, they're married, they've got a healthy relationship. They're good parents. A lot of the other kids just don't have good parents. And so, as you said, it is really easy just to go like, you know what? I hate them. They're awful. They hate me. As soon as I'm turning 18, I am out of here. And that's oftentimes what happens. And I'm very glad that didn't happen to me.
And you mentioned that you're autistic. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and why that's an important factor, because we're hearing that the number of, especially girls who are autistic, that are being drawn into the transgender ideology is just inordinate. Do you have any insights as to why that might be, other than the social factor? Maybe that is enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's also the fact that we think very, very much in black and white. And so it is much easier for an autistic person to get sort of stuck in a particular worldview because, well, that worldview is correct, these ones are wrong, and so I'm going to stick with the correct one. That's the autistic mind working for you. And so it's very easy for an autistic person to, have this particular ideology, whether it's transgenders or not, and go like, this seems to make sense, it makes me happy, thus it is correct. And then once you're in that and somebody else tries to throw something at you that would question that, you just go, nope, that doesn't compute. Just, and you just block that off, because black and white, there's very little nuance. And so that probably is what keeps a lot of people into this, is that black and white thinking and that inability to kind of really think about criticism in a nuanced and complex way.
So if you're on the autism spectrum, did you have an IEP when you were in school, an individualized education plan? Like, did you have special ed services when you were in public school?
Yes, I did. I didn't have like a very, very large amount of them, but yeah, I went to the school counselor. I had a lot of it when I was in elementary school. I had, teachers helping me with my homework and that kind of thing. I sort of became, just because I was developing through middle school, I became more and more independent of my IEP. And I actually I had to take a moment and go, oh, wait, yeah, I did have one. When you asked me that, because I just haven't like used it since like 6th grade. So yeah,
the reason I ask is, if you already had an IEP and a special ed team in place, when you announced a transgender identity, did that team, like, was there ever any like, well, wait a minute, she's on the autism spectrum, wait, she's got this other issue, let's investigate whether that's a factor in the trans identity? Did that ever come up?
Not once, not even remotely. I mean, my mom was like pushing for that. She was like, wait a minute, hold on, this doesn't make much sense. Let's just take a moment to just think about this a little bit. And the entire SPED team was like, nope, this is objectively true. We have to affirm this. Yeah, the only my mom was like actually pausing to say, wait, maybe this has to do with autism. And then she also got me a therapist who is not aligned with the school at all, who was critical of that, but she was very good in the sense that she didn't like try to she never told me you're autistic so you can't be transgender. She just very, very quietly sort of helped me think critically by asking questions, as opposed to just blindly affirming, which was very good.
I'm glad that Maria asked that about the IEP, because another thing that we've heard is that some of these kids are getting a gender plan. And so the teachers sit down with the child. Often, if the parent's not affirming, they leave the parent out, and they come up with, the plan, what name is going to be called, what pronouns are going to be used, what bathroom is going to be used, whether or not the parents get to know about it. Did any of that happen with you?
I'll be honest, that didn't even need to happen, just because they did that with everyone. At the beginning of the school year, everyone would get a paper. At the beginning of school year, you get a paper with like, what's your name? What's your favorite color? Do you have any pets? It was exactly that, except it also included, what are your pronouns? What's your preferred name? And that kind of thing. And so, I put on my, nickname at the time, and then like he/they. And then it was, well, this is a non-binary male leaning whatever person, so we're going to have him/them use the boys' bathroom then. And I didn't even need to have that with the teachers, because they just did that with everyone.
So were you using the boys' bathroom at school?
Yes. Either way, I didn't really use the bathroom at school that often, just because I hate public restrooms. But when I did, I used the boys' bathroom.
What was that like? Did you feel at all like you were invading the space of boys who were in there? Did they at all question, or was it just completely sort of everybody just in lockstep with, yep, she's a boy?
I had the advantage of going to a really, really small school. And so I wouldn't say everybody knew each other, but most people kind of knew most other people. And so I didn't really run the risk of, anyone saying like, oh my gosh, there's a girl in the boys' bathroom, because everyone's like, oh yeah, that's just another trans kid. And I also really thankfully didn't run the risk of anything happening, because, when you have guys and girls both in the bathroom together, things can happen. And I did not know self-defense back then. Sorry. And I did not know self-defense back then. So if I had gone to a really large school, there's a very good chance that something would have happened. But thankfully it didn't. And I know now that it could have.
When you were in public, did you use men's bathrooms?
Just like in public spaces?
Yeah, like at the
Like at a
mall
restaurant or something.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, usually I was either with my mom, and so she had me use the girls' bathroom. There was a unisex bathroom, which is pretty common nowadays, or it was just like I didn't really use the bathroom, because again, I hate public restrooms. They're nasty.
I'm kind of the same as you. If there's a chance to avoid using a public restroom, I will experience a lot of discomfort in order to avoid, especially on airplanes. Whenever I fly, I like try and time it so that I can avoid the bathroom. But that to me, one of the issues with this whole ideology is that not only does it sort of force you into this thought pattern and to this, misbelief that you can become the opposite sex, but it requires those around you to buy into that. So even if there was a boy in there who was uncomfortable with you being in there, he wouldn't have really probably had been comfortable telling people, because he likely would have been labeled transphobic, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's more common for, a transgender identified boy to go use the girls' restroom, and then the girls are like, no thank you, we don't want a guy in our restroom. It's not as much common as with the other way. But yeah, if a guy had said, I don't really want a biological girl in my restroom, then people probably would have been like, oh, you're just being rude, let him go wherever he wants.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, looking back, kind of going back to the beginning of when you started becoming trans-identified, is there anything that you think your parents or the school isn't trying to prevent anyone becoming trans-identified, but is there anything that would have stopped you? Is there anything that early on, if something had been different, you might not have gone the trans route?
Well, I mean, obviously not being exposed to all the crap as a sixth grader. Also, maybe starting to take martial arts earlier. Martial arts is one of the biggest things that pulled me out of that, because not only is my karate instructor one of the wisest people I have ever met in my entire life, but I also became physically strong. And now, like, I could defend myself if somebody attacked me. And so I don't have that, like, I'm a woman, I'm weak because I'm a woman mentality anymore. Like, I can say, like, I'm a black belt, I can defend myself. And so if I was taking karate back then, I probably would have not been sucked into that I need to be a man in order to be strong as early.
Well, the reason I ask that question is we often talk to parents of, they call us, they email us, my child just announced a trans identity. And one of the things that we're trying to think about is what advice can we give parents, especially if they can't pull their child from public school? How can parents keep their kids from being introduced to this? I'm not sure it's possible, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, if it's somebody who hasn't been introduced to it yet, I would say use the kind of preventative, just say, take them aside and say, like, look, it's very likely that people are going to try to tell you that, boys and girls are the same thing, or that, a man can become a woman or vice versa. Just like very kindly say, these people have been lied to, these people they don't realize that that's not true, and that's not true. And then your kid will be like, well, okay, that's not true. And then when somebody tries to tell them that, then they'll know it's not true.
I I'm so glad you said that. I was just reading a book about child development, and it says that children, when they're taught stuff, they tend to sort of default to what they were taught. And so if they're confused or uncomfortable, that they tend to default to what they were first taught. And I don't know how true that is, but in your case, you had not been exposed to even the concept of transgender, and then bam, it kind of hit hard. And so one of the things that Maria and I do talk about is teaching kids from an early age. And unfortunately, at this point, it has to be really early, that there is this ideology out there. There are harms associated with it. It's not just an innocuous kind of trend or, way of dressing, or, I think a lot of parents, they think, oh, my child is just sort of expressing themselves. They're going to get the haircut, wear different clothes. It's no big deal. And they don't understand that this ideology puts them on the pathway towards self-harm. And I'm wondering, do you think if you had the option of accessing cross-sex hormones when you were young, when you first got introduced to this, would you have gone after them if you had the opportunity to get them without your parents' consent?
That's a bit of a tough question. If I had quote unquote affirming parents, I almost certainly would have. But because my parents not only did not affirm me, but also researched what the heck is testosterone and what does it do to the female body, like they told me, like very, not mean, but very blunt, but not rude. They told me testosterone will demineralize your bones. It will cause heart damage. It will cause, atrophy of your reproductive organs, that kind of thing. I had a bit more of a whoa, hold on a minute. So I was much less likely to go after it than a lot of my peers who had never learned that. But if I had, turned 18 as a trans kid and then gone off and just decided to go the full shabam, I probably would have eventually ended up doing that because of all of the pressure to do that. And then I would have obviously gone through with all the surgeries and all the crap.
There was something you said that brought up a thought, and then I was so kind of intrigued by what you were saying that I forgot. But I think that this, this ideology is so insidious because it undermines your ability to even know what reality is. It sounds like your parents did a great job of guiding you during this difficult time. I can't imagine, if you hadn't had parents, if you had parents that had affirmed, where you would be right now. But one of the questions that as I'm looking at you, for those, the viewers can't see you and the people listening to the podcast can't see you, but you would be what I would consider look like a tomboy. When I was a kid, that's what it would have been called. Gender nonconforming is probably the language now. And I've talked to a number of people who are gender nonconforming, and because of the trans ideology now, people just automatically assume they're trans. I was wondering if you have had that experience at all.
Sort of both, people assuming that I'm trans and people seeing out of the corner of their eye and then thinking that I'm a guy. I was actually just in the bathroom. I was helping clean up from synagogue, and I was in the bathroom because I'd gotten something nasty on my hands. I was washing my hands, and a lady walked out of the bathroom. I was in the girls' bathroom, by the way. And she said, "Oh, excuse me, sir," because she was like, "Oh, there's a boy in the girls' bathroom. Oh crap!" And then she went like, "Oh, wait, sorry, you're a girl." And I was like, "It's fine." So sometimes that happens. I'm very, I'm tall, I'm skinny, I have short hair, but yeah, there's always kind of that knowledge that people probably see me and think I'm a trans kid, because that's one of the things that drives me insane about this so much is it's people say, "Oh, we're getting rid of gender stereotypes." No, you're just flipping it around. It used to be girls have to like pink and dresses, boys have to like trucks and shorts. But now it's, if you like trucks and shorts, you're a boy, and if you like pink and dresses, you're a girl. I have very, very few qualities about me that are stereotypically feminine, and because of that, people kind of assume that I'm either just a guy who happens to look a little bit feminine facially, or I'm just a trans kid.
And to me, that's one of the most heartbreaking things about this ideology is that when I was growing up, I'm significantly older than you, probably closer to your parents' age than you,
Yeah.
and there was sort of this push towards breaking down gender stereotypes, breaking down allowing women to express themselves, not requiring the very traditional look. And now it seems like we've gone full circle, and someone who looked like you when I was growing up would have been a tomboy. Nobody would have even thought that you were a boy or a man. It wouldn't have even crossed their minds. Now we live in a day and age where people are like, oh, is it? And they're probably sort of wondering, like, what pronouns should I use? Do I need to, I mean, it's just created this whole anxiety. And ultimately, as you said, reinforcing the very stereotypes that we've tried to get away from.
Yeah, I mean, I have had guy friends, and I still have guy friends who are just so sweet and soft. They're stereotypically feminine. Some of them like dresses or scarves or things that are stereotypically feminine. And unfortunately, a lot of them have adopted a trans identity because you can't be a guy and be feminine. And the same thing with girls who are masculine. And it's really sad because you just can't have either of the other ways. I mean, I get called sir a lot when I'm like holding the door for somebody, and I just kind of awkwardly say I'm a woman, and there's kind of that like oh, like
I'm
I'm
so glad you do that, Petra. I'm so glad. Good for you. I
I
think it's
mean,
so, because I have a friend who's older, but she's told me that she gets called sir all the time now. Never used to, but within the last couple of years now, people are always they or sir, or what are your pronouns? And she hates it. That never was an issue before. So I'm so glad you say, hey, I'm a woman. It's okay for women to look like this.
yeah, I mean, I have a good friend who's from karate, and we were working on our fix together, and I don't think she's really into this. I don't think she really has a stake in this. And so she's just going with the culture flow. But she asked me what my pronouns are. And I said, I am a woman. And she said, so you use she, her pronouns? And I said, it's grammatically correct to call a female by she, her pronouns. So yes, call me that. And because she's not like super into this, she just kind of like, okay, then never gotten that response before. But it's like, that's just kind of how people think it is now. You just ask for people's pronouns if they're even slightly not conforming to gender stereotypes.
Well, I know you got pulled from school, so you weren't with the same peer group that was affirming you. But how has it been since you desisted, since you stopped claiming a transgender identity? Has anything happened with your friendships? I'm thinking, like, are people like, oh, okay, cool, you detransitioned, awesome. Or are you having a different experience?
It really depends on the friends. Like, I have one good friend who she's super, super into this, but kind of to the point where she's just like, anything's valid. Like, I told her I was transgender when I was in 7th grade, and she was like, okay, sure, that's valid. And then I told her I desisted, and she was like, okay, sure, that's valid. But then I had another friend who was just so, so happy when I trans identified. And then when I told her that I was desisting, she was just completely deer in the headlights. She actually asked me, do you think maybe your parents have been like influencing you? Because she'd never had that happen before. She was probably really like, wait, is my friend like never been trans, or is quote unquote he like just repressing himself or something? So she very much freaked out. Our friendship actually came to a halt for a couple months, and then I was able to kind of squeeze my way back into things, and now we're in kind of a slightly dicey area over the past long time. And so yeah.
It's interesting because I get two responses when I talk about the fact that I had this transgender experience as a child, and it sounds very similar to you. One, they say, well, since you didn't stay transitioned, you were never really trans, even though by very definition, the ideology says if a child is insistent, consistent, and persistent, they are trans. Or they say that I actually am trans and I've just repressed it, which means that I'm actually a man and I'm in a gay relationship with my husband. I mean, it gets very convoluted.
And your 3 children, how did those come about?
Well, Maria, men can have babies.
Oh, silly
They can
me,
be
silly me.
birthing person. No, it does. It gets very silly, but I think that kind of response really is disarming, because what they say is that we have to honor this, that people will kill themselves if their gender identity isn't affirmed. And anytime you have a desister who comes along and says, well, actually, I was trans and I'm not now, they have to silence that, or else it starts to undermine their entire ideology.
Yeah, because again, the only 2 responses are either A, you were never trans, which is not only rather rude, but it's also kind of contradictory to the whole, if you say you're trans, you're automatically trans, or B, you're just repressing your true self, which I personally, when my friend said that maybe I was just repressing myself, I was like, I'm genuinely happier this way. Like, I actually do not want to be a man. Like, if somebody gave me the option to be a biological man, I would say, no, get that out of my face. Like I'm not repressing anything.
Not to mention you're a woman.
Yes. Also, considering the fact that I'm a woman, I'm proud to be a woman, and I have been very, very into feminist literature and just kind of historical, woman and that kind of thing. And it's very, I'm trying to think of the word here. After having accepted myself as a woman, I am much more free to really study people like Sor Juana, like Moderata Font / Modesto Pazzo, depending on whether you're using her pseudonym. These historical women who have done just incredible things, who are just so incredibly feminist and also really good people, and kind of be like, yeah, I'm proud to be a woman. And a lot of people just don't have that.
Well, and speaking of pseudonyms, we didn't really talk about why you are covered up, why your face isn't showing today.
Yeah, I am trying to get a job right now, and I'm also trying to get into college, both of which, this is the number one thing that I just scoff when people say that, oh, transgender people are so nice and kind and loving, because I know that if I, told people, oh yeah, I'm a desister, they would do everything they possibly can. They will go on a rabid manhunt to try to prevent me from getting into colleges, to prevent me from getting jobs, because that's what they do, because they can't actually argue with people. And so you just cut out their tongue. You just got to push them to the edge so you don't have to deal with them.
And once you got a job, you would be at risk.
Yeah, probably. And in college too. The college that I'm looking at right now is very diverse worldview wise. So there would obviously be people there who are into this, but there's also people who aren't. So I wouldn't be as worried if I got into this college about people in it attacking me. But at a job, oh, absolutely. I would be just, I don't know, working at Subway, for example, making sandwiches, and then somebody comes in and goes, oh my gosh, you're that sister? I'm not getting a sandwich from you. I'm going to go to Five Guys.
Yeah, I have a little,
I would be surprised if that happened.
I have a little knitting and crochet business that I do on the side. And I've had 2 people in the last 2 weeks find out that I am gender critical, and they have gone on the war path. I mean, they've said, I'm gonna tell all my friends, I can't believe, you would even think that you can sell crochet patterns. Yeah.
Yeah. And I recently was at a grocery store, and somebody who I would have considered a very good friend a couple years ago came up to me and said, how dare you show your face in public? So it really is, it's so hard to, especially for younger people, who are trying to establish themselves to be able to even talk about what really happened, which is ironic because part of this whole ideology is you being able to, talk about your authentic story and your true self and your lived experience. And yet it's very clear they only want to hear from people with lived experiences that confirm their worldview.
Yeah, I remember I was talking, this is the friend who we've had a really touchy relationship since I announced that he assisted. And I was talking to her and I just asked her, because, she's very liberal. I don't think she's ever spoken to a conservative person in her life, but I just asked her, just out of curiosity, what would it take for you to talk to a conservative person? And she she said, I would talk to a conservative person if they have been presented with updated information and change their opinions accordingly to match with such updated information. So I kind of went like, so you'll talk to a conservative person only if they're liberal, is what you're saying.
Wow.
Because anyone who disagrees with you is just inhuman, is just a monster. And I'm like, it's the same problem as a lot of conservatives have. Like, I read in an article about this person. He moved into a really, really rural area, super kind of, I hate to use this slur, but, redneck country kind of thing. And he put up a Black Lives Matter sign in his yard, and like 3 times in a row, people came and beat it to bits with a baseball bat. And I'm like, it's the same problem, just on the different side. Because anyone who disagrees with you is just somehow a monster and like
So,
tolerating.
yeah. And it's so sad. I was reading a book about the Enlightenment, and part of the Enlightenment was sort of this hunger for different ideas. This, like, we want our ideas challenged. We want to talk about different things. We want people to poke holes in our in our ideas. We want to hear all the possible hypotheses about why something could happen, because that's how we grow and learn and really figure things out. And to me, it's just like the opposite now, where people are even willing to skew research in order to get the results that they want, undermining science completely. Often these are people who say that anybody who doesn't follow the science is, horrible, awful. And yet they're willing to undermine their convictions in order to forward their convictions. It's very sad.
Yeah, the end justifies the means. Yeah.
That's one of the things that both sides do this so much. The idea that even allowing a person with a slightly different opinion than yours within 50 miles of you somehow compromises your moral values, when it doesn't. Like, some of my friends and I have this group chat. It's like we have a regular group chat just for chatting, and then we have this other group chat that we use only for debating, because especially myself being politically intermediate and this being a very conservative group of friends, we just debate on that. And I don't think there's anything where one of us has swayed the other person's opinions, but you really learn. Like I'm, for example, I am pro-life. I have a lot of issues with the pro-life movement because I think it is far too narrow-minded. It's just, we have to make abortion illegal, as opposed to actually helping people who are vulnerable to it. I have learned new things about the pro-life movement from my other pro-life friends, and about the pro-choice movement from my pro-choice friends, that even though I don't agree with it, it gives me a wider scope of what's actually going on. And, an argument that my pro-choice friends have made is that, abortion is the only way that a woman is equal to a man sexually, because a man can get hanky-panky, make a baby, and walk away. Without abortion, a woman can't do that, so she's at a disadvantage. No one who's pro-life ever addresses that, because they're both just in these two encampments and they refuse to listen to each other's opinions. And when you kind of have both, then you can go, wow, there's actually a lot to both sides. Even though I still agree with one or the other, or kind of in between, there's still so much on both sides. And just people can't do that because that somehow compromises them.
It's like they're just talking past each other because they're not willing to actually confront these areas, because in almost every issue there's to just dismiss somebody on the other side as, delusional or hateful or crazy or stupid, which is what just is increasingly happening. I think that you've tapped into something really powerful to listen. What is the argument? And maybe you will change your mind, and maybe you won't, but you'll understand why other people hold that view, and that they are still human beings, and they're still worthy of respect and dignity, even though you disagree with them.
Yeah, and there's just more and more I've realized just looking at both sides. I've realized there is so much more nuance than anyone wants to believe in everything. There is no subject like that I have researched that I have ever once said this side is right. Because there's even subjects where I've said, I don't think either side is right. I don't think there is a right answer. I think this is something with so much nuance that there really is no solid right answer. And there's just so much that people just cannot accept there not being a black and white answer. This side is right, this side is wrong, that people just can't think critically. I've had my extremely conservative friends and my extremely liberal friends both say, word for word, if only everyone would think critically, then they'd agree with me. And I ask, what does it mean to think critically? And they're like, to think like me. Because
I find this amazing listening to you. I feel like you've gone through an incredible development, because as you mentioned, being on the autism spectrum, you tend to think black and white. And it seems like you've really allowed yourself to get out of a comfort zone, because it's uncomfortable to not have that 100% conviction that you're right. And it seems like you have really gotten to a point where you're willing to sit in this discomfort and say, there is nuance. There's a lot of different ways you can look at it. There's a lot of different ways to inform this subject. And I commend you for that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah,
Thank you. Go ahead, Petra.
Okay, yeah. That's just one of those things where I also, nobody wants to think about this. There are things that some people think are really important that other people don't think are important, and things that those people think are important that the other people don't think are important. And people don't really realize that. Like, that's one of the biggest issues with a lot of liberal people nowadays. I believe with every ounce of my being that Black people are just as valuable, as smart, as important as white people. But I feel very, very called towards other issues, and Black Lives Matter and racial justice is not an issue that I want to invest 100% of my time and energy and money into. And somehow not wanting to invest 100% of my time and energy and money into that makes me racist, because I have other things that I'm called towards. And it's the same thing with people who feel really called towards racial justice. They might not feel so called towards environmental protection, but that doesn't make them hate the environment. And people just don't really recognize that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we haven't had a chance to cover or ask you about? Any last thoughts?
I don't think so.
Well, we've learned a lot from you, and I know parents are always so anxious to hear from people who've gone through it. And so we appreciate the insights and the wisdom that you've given us, and to help parents who are going through this with their kids.
And I'm also just really thankful. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, one thing I would really suggest to parents is, if your kid, even if your kid isn't identified as transgender, just put your kid in martial arts. It teaches you so much discipline, and like, it gives you so much confidence in yourself. Put your kid in martial arts. That is just,
yeah. And it also draws you into your body, because I know when I was super gender dysphoric, I was totally up here. I was in my head all the time. I was disconnected from my body. I didn't even feel like we were the same person. And something that martial arts does, or swimming, or any kind of sport, it pulls you into your body. And I think that's really important for people who are struggling with these issues.
Yeah, and it gives you I already said this, but it gives you confidence in yourself and like genuine respect for your body.
Mm.
Because like I remember this one time I was still transgender identified, but we were learning self-defense moves, and I had this epiphany. Like we were learning this particular move called the hammer arm that you could break somebody's collarbone with if they're attacking you. And I had this just epiphany of my arm, this arm that belongs to me, could break somebody's collarbone if they attacked me. And I'm like I have so much respect for myself now that I have the power to defend myself and the power to like actually hurt someone who is trying to hurt me. And that's really, really important in martial arts, is that sort of just respect for your body that transgenderism just aims to destroy.
Yeah, I love that idea of it bringing you back to your body and giving you respect for your body.
Yeah. And Petra, I'm so thankful that you are such a strong role model for younger girls and young women who are, you know, so in need of women who are strong and capable and smart, and not buying into the idea that they have to conform to these regressive sex-based stereotypes. So thank you for this interview, and also just for being a great role model out there in the world for girls.